Hello and welcome back to Koala Moon, children's bedtime stories and meditations designed to make bedtime a dream. Many of you have been asking why on earth we changed our name from Koko Sleep to Koala Moon. If you snuggle up, I will tell you. It all started when Koko mentioned the Koala Moon to me. He said as much as his bedtime stories helped all of you drift off to sleep, really, it was the Koala Moon that did it, and so that should be the show's name instead. This is Koko and the Koala Moon by Susanna McLaughlin. In the heart of Sleepy Forest stands a little wooden cabin. This little cabin has stood there for years, being bathed in sunshine, drummed by rain, and washed in the light of the moon. Within the cabin live a family of koalas, and one little panda too. The littlest koala is named Koko. For years, when the sun began to set, the little koala would yawn and rub his eyes with his paws, and everyone would know it was bedtime. Koko would be bathed in the bubbliest of baths. He would be given a mug of hot, frothy cocoa, and he'd be tucked up in woolly blankets and told a story. This story was sometimes told by his dad, sometimes by his mum, sometimes by Grandma, and sometimes by Auntie Shirley, if she was stopping by in between one of her whirlwind adventures. The night that Koko learned about the Koala Moon, it was told by his grandpa. Koko was little then, not much more than a baby. His brown eyes were especially big and sparkled especially bright when he was sleepy. Grandad pulled up a chair to the side of Koko's bed and flopped down into it with a sigh, taking off his glasses to polish them with his handkerchief. He leafed through the books in Koko's bookshelf and asked the little koala what adventure he wanted to take that night. Would it be exploring the high seas with Atticus the pirate? Flying broomsticks with a magical pair of wizarding twins? Or a simple walk in the park with a couple of friendly dogs? Koko yawned a little tired yawn once more and blinked slowly. "Something different, please, Grandad," he said. "Something new." And so Grandad looked around, racking his brains for something new. His gaze fell out the window and into the sky, where the moon hung round and watchful, sending a gentle silver glow across Sleepy Forest to glint gently against Grandad's round-framed glasses. "Have you heard the one about the Koala Moon?" Grandad asked Koko. Koko shook his head almost imperceptibly as he settled deeper into his pillow. "Well, here's how it goes," Grandad said. "Every night, as the world falls still, the sky pinkens and darkens up until the Koala Moon begins to rise. It yawns and opens up its eyes. If you look very close at the moon above, you'll see someone looking back with love, with two big eyes and a gentle smile. It's the koala on the moon, come to stay a while." The koala watches over sleepy heads as they're all tucked up warm in their cozy beds. She wraps the world in a gentle glow that says, "Calm down. It's time to be slow. It's time to let your worries float away. It's time to say goodnight to the day. Drift into dreams and start to snore as the Koala Moon shines brighter than ever before." Grandad looked down at tiny baby Koko, ready to continue his story, but Koko was already fast asleep, snoring ever so gently and smiling softly. He looked up to the moon and wished it a good night. In the little koala's dreams, a moon was beginning to rise. It was just like our moon, but a little different. It was the shape of 3 intertwining circles, a round face and 2 round ears. It was silver, just like ours, and it had craters on it, but its face was much clearer. There were 2 smiling eyes, a round velvety nose, and a soft pink smile, beaming down at the world. The moon was just like ours, yes, but it was just a little more clearly a koala. Koko sat up in his soft bed and rested his elbows on the windowsill. He looked down at his paws and giggled at how the light from the koala moon turned his fur extra silver and seemed to shimmer and sparkle as he moved his hands up and down. He gazed up at the moon, which seemed to float closer to Earth than ever before. "Good evening, Koala Moon," he called. "Good evening, Koko," she called back. Koko gasped, realizing that the moon had heard him all the way from space. "Can you hear me?" he asked. The koala moon giggled, her laugh as melodic and light as the twinkles coming from the stars. "Yes, Koko," she said. "It's such a peaceful and beautifully still night that I can hear you perfectly." Koko grinned. "Are there not still spaceships zipping about up there, and satellites bleeping and blooping, and shooting stars squealing by?" The koala moon paused to listen to the sounds of space, then shook her head. "Nope," she said. "It's utterly peaceful, completely, beautifully quiet." Koko nodded. Apart from the usual soft trill of crickets and the gentle creaks and rustles of the old moonlit trees, Sleepy Forest was silent too. "Can you see the whole of Sleepy Forest from up there?" he asked. "In fact, I bet you can see the whole world from up there." "Only the parts where my moonlight falls," the koala moon said. "Only the places where it's nighttime. But yes, I can see a lot. I can see all of the sleepy little creatures tucked up in Sleepy Forest. I can see Fudge the sloth snoozing in a tree, and Whiskers, Pebbles, and Paws the little otters floating down Sleepy River on their backs. I can see lots of little cabins where little night lights shine and little glow-in-the-dark stars gleam on the ceilings. It really is peaceful. And that's thanks to me. That's my job, Koko, you see. I hang up here in the sky and shine across the world, making everybody sleepy. If I wasn't here, Munchie would still be riding around on his pizza-mobile. Hector and Sunny would still be digging in the garden, and Disco would be out dancing. But when they see me, everybody begins to yawn. They know it's time to cuddle up, snuggle down, and begin to dream. Koko smiled. "Just like every night?" he asked. "Just like every night." From then on, every time Koko saw the silver shining moon, He'd send a sleepy smile to the koala he knew lived on its face. And sometimes, when he needed it, he spoke to her again. It made him feel safe and loved to know she was always watching over him. One night, when Koko was older and had just gotten his pink ukulele, he slipped into another dream and once again looked up to the koala moon. He sat on a little wooden rowboat amongst golden fireflies and wrote a twinkling lullaby. The notes drifted all the way up on the soft, warm breeze to the koala moon, who thanked Koko for his song. You must get tired of having songs written about you, Koko chuckled. And the moon giggled but said no, she'd never tire of hearing people sing about her. In another dream, an even older Koko took a trip in his Auntie Shirley's rocket and twirled and whirled around the koala moon, making her laugh as he did loop-the-loops and floated mid-air in his spacesuit. One night, in the run-up to his first day at Kookaburra Kindy, a little tiny Koko tossed and turned until he fell into a dream where the koala moon was in the sky, hanging her washing amongst the stars. "Excuse me," he called to the koala moon. She smiled down at him, never too busy to make time for her little koala friend. "I don't think I'll be able to sleep very soundly tonight," he said. "I'm going to Kookaburra Kindy tomorrow, and I'm a little bit scared. What if no one likes me? What if I'm not smart enough, or arty enough, or not good enough at sports?" The koala moon shushed Koko with a smile. "It's okay to be nervous, Koko." She frowned. "When I come out at night, I try to bring peace and quiet and sleepiness. But some people say nighttime can also bring a little worry. Some people find that without the busyness of the day, their heads can get a little busy and full, and they start thinking about what might happen tomorrow. But Koko, everything is going to be okay. If you ever feel unsure, I want you to look at me and remember that you're a smart koala. You're a brave koala, and you're going to do your best. And if things go wrong, I'll see you tomorrow night, and we can just giggle about it then, okay?" Koko nodded. "Okay." Every time he looked up at the moon from then on, he imagined her telling him those things. He would even repeat them to himself. He would say, "I'm a smart koala. I'm a brave koala. And I'm going to do my best. Everything is going to be okay." And everything was okay. The night after Koko started Kookaburra Kindy, he looked up at the koala moon from a dream drifting amongst marshmallow clouds and laughed. He told her he'd met a little hedgehog called Prickles and a little chameleon called Camo, who he thought he'd be friends with forever. He told her that they sang songs and played games and made up stories. He told her about how he got finger paint all over his fur, and everybody thought he looked funny. The koala moon grinned and said she'd have found that funny too. The night that Koko's new adopted sister, Kira, arrived at his house, Koko looked at the moon again He had a very important question to ask her. When he drifted off and found himself floating on a lilo in a swimming pool made of hot cocoa, he looked up, and once again the koala moon was up there, humming to herself and knitting a scarf from the smudgy trails of the Milky Way. "Koala Moon?" he asked, and she looked down at him over her soft nose. "Oh, hey, Koko," she said. "What's up?" "I was just wondering," Koko asked, taking a sip of the mug of hot chocolate he was holding in his paw. "You're the Koala Moon, right? So you watch over me. But I have a new sister now, and she's a panda. Will you look over her, too?" The Koala Moon laughed. "Yes, Koko, I will look over Kira. I look over anybody who needs me," she said. "In fact, she's just drifting off now. Here she comes." Koko heard a whee and saw his sister riding down the curling water slide to land in the hot chocolate pool. "This is the best dream ever," she called, waving to Koko as she paddled in the warm chocolate. Sometimes Koko would see the moon in the daytime. You know, when the sky is a gentle blue and the sun is behind a cloud and you look up to see a little sliver of moon and wonder what she's doing up. Koko knew what she was doing up. The koala moon was just popping by to check everyone was doing okay. Sometimes he'd see her on an afternoon when something wasn't going so well, when he was finding class hard, or when he couldn't win a game, or when he'd just woken up wrong and everything was making him grumpy. He'd glimpse the koala moon and know that she was trying to tell him that everything would be fine. He'd then look at himself in the mirror and say, "I'm a smart koala. I'm a brave koala. And I'm going to do my best. Everything is going to be okay." And it always was. He asked his granddad once whether he ever spoke to the koala moon, and he said yes. He said he even sang to her sometimes. He said he'd looked up at the koala moon the day he graduated koala college and known he was on the right path. He said he'd asked Grandma if she'd marry him under the koala moon, and he swore he heard the moon cheer when she said yes. He even said that the day Koko was born, the koala moon was full and bright in the sky above the hospital. One night, after Koko and his friends had spent the evening at the Sleepy Forest Circus, they were sitting on the front porch of the koala's cabin, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot cocoa. Koko looked up at the moon and waved. "Do you see the face on the moon?" he asked his friends. They squinted up at the shining orb in the sky and all murmured and nodded and hummed in agreement. "Do you know that face belongs to a koala?" Koko said. "It's the koala moon. She's always watching over us and making sure we're okay." His sister Kira wrinkled her little panda nose and asked if he was sure it was a koala moon. She thought it was a panda. Prickles the hedgehog giggled. He said he'd always known that as the hedgehog on the moon. Didn't they see its snuffly little pointed nose? Camo grinned and said he thought the face on the moon was a chameleon. He pointed to a constellation of twirling stars. Those there make up his tail. From his rocking chair, Koko's granddad chuckled. Humans even call it the man on the moon, he said. But whoever's right, everyone has one thing in common. The moon is always there, watching over us and letting us know that it's time to go to bed. And we know that we can yawn and cuddle and drift off to Dreamland, safe and loved, as long as the moon is up above. Koko asked Grandad if he could tell them the story again, just like he told Koko all those years ago. Grandad nodded and began. Every night as the world falls still, the sky pinkens and darkens up until the koala moon begins to rise. It yawns and opens up its eyes. If you look very close at the moon above, you'll see someone looking back with love. With two big eyes and a gentle smile. It's the koala on the moon, come to stay a while. The koala watches over sleepy little heads as they're tucked up warm in their little beds. She wraps the world in a gentle glow that says, calm down, it's time to be slow. It's time to let your worries float away. It's time to say good night to the day. Drift into dreams and start to snore as the koala moon shines brighter than ever before. Up on her surface, glowing like pearl, there are little creatures beginning to stir. All the way up in twinkling space, little koalas run across the moon's face. Little fuzzy creatures, all silver and small, live in her craters, playing chase and moonball. Whilst the earth koalas are tucked up tight, the moon koalas play all through the night. The koala moon smiles as she watches over us all, every human and creature, whether big or small. From the koalas in space to the ones on the earth, all the children in bed, from London to Perth. She rolls around the stars and sings from the sky, making friends with comets as they rush by. She chats to the sun and says hi to rockets, handing out candy she keeps in her pockets. She sends out her love into the whole of space with a gentle smile on her koala face. If you listen carefully when it comes to bedtime, she'll read you a story, a poem, or rhyme. She'll send you to places far, far away with stories that lead you to dreams, then to day. If she's not there in the morning, don't you worry. When the sun goes down, she'll be back in a hurry. For now, she'll be sleeping in her own starry bed, knowing that you are watching out for her instead. When he finished his story, he smiled to see Koko, Kira, Prickles, and Camo all snoozing where they sat. He looked up at the koala moon and winked. "You've worked your magic again," he said, and the koala moon winked back. So, that's the story of why Koko's sleep became Koala Moon. Because Koko thought we should all know about the Koala Moon. Because she helps him sleep easy every single night. And she might help you too. The Koala Moon is out there right now, shining on the world and bathing it in calm. Can you feel her? Her twinkly eyes shining in the sky, her big velvety nose and little peaceful smile, letting you know that you are loved and safe and sleepy. Every time you look at the moon, give her a wave and remind yourself, I am safe, I am loved, I am sleepy under the Koala Moon. Tonight, we're getting into the Christmassy mood as we head back into Sleepy Forest on a snowy Christmas Eve and visit the home of our little friend. Do you remember him? It's Koko, the youngest koala in his family. We join him as he catches the sound of distant jingle bells ringing through the forest. As he follows the sound, the little koala is led to a very special person. Koko's Cozy Christmas by Gillian Rogerson. It was Christmas Eve and snow had been falling softly all day on Sleepy Forest. The snowflakes settled on a cozy cabin that lay deep in the heart of the forest. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas. The youngest koala was called Koko. On that snowy eve, the koala family were busy making final preparations for Christmas Day. Grandpa and Grandma Koala were in the kitchen, baking tantalizing treats. The delicious aroma of nutmeg, cinnamon, and gingerbread drifted through the cozy cabin. Father Koala had been busy all day chopping wood for the fire. He wanted to make sure the family would keep snug and warm during the chilly winter months. Once he'd chopped enough logs, he had placed them in a neat pile next to the cabin. Father Koala took some logs into the home and put them into a basket at the side of the fireplace. Some pieces of wood were already alight in the grate, and the soothing sounds of crackling logs added to the comforting atmosphere in the home. Amber and orange flames danced merrily over the spruce-scented wood. Mother Koala was sitting in an armchair near the window and had a colourful collection of wool at her side. She was putting the final touches on the many gifts she'd made for her family and friends. Every time someone in the cabin approached her, they were told to close their eyes so as not to spoil their surprise the following morning. Little Koko was in charge of decorations, and he had been busy for days making sure the family home looked as magical as it possibly could. Koko stood in the middle of the room and looked at the decorations to ensure there was enough festive cheer. Glittering garlands of gold and silver tinsel looped through the green branches of the Christmas tree. Sparkling baubles dangled from the end of branches, and homemade crackers nestled between pine-scented boughs. A large silver star made out of card stood proudly on top of the tree. Koko had made the star when he was very young, and even though it was lopsided and most of the glitter had fallen off, his family insisted the star take pride of place on the tree every year. With help from his father, Koko had hung red and green paper chains around the house. Homemade paper snowflakes decorated every window, making the inside of the cabin look as enchanting as the snow-covered forest outside. The family continued with their activities, and soon the light of day gave way to the pink glow of dusk. Outside, the snow continued to silently fall and covered Sleepy Forest in a glittering white blanket. Koko pressed his nose against the window and gazed at the snowy sky. Snowflakes fluttered gently downwards. Some got caught in a breeze and were taken up before pausing and drifting downwards once more. A large snowflake landed on the window. Koko gazed at the intricate pattern of the flake and marvelled at how wonderful it was. His grandpa had told him that every snowflake was different and no two were the same. For Koko, that had only added to the magic of snow. Grandpa came to his side and put his arm around the little koala. Koko asked, "Grandpa, do you think Santa will be okay in the snow? It's been falling all day. Will he still find his way here and to everyone else in the forest?" With a smile, Grandpa replied, "Santa always finds his way, no matter how deep the snow." He tilted his head to the side. "Did you hear that?" Koko hadn't heard anything, but he tilted his head just as Grandpa had done. Grandpa said, "There it is again. The sound of distant bells jingling merrily. How peculiar. Koko, you've finished all the Christmas decorations. Why don't you go on a snowy adventure and find out where that noise is coming from? Wrap up warm, it's cold out there." Koko thought going on a snowy adventure was an excellent idea, and he liked the thought of solving a mystery at the end of it. He put his coat on and wrapped a scarf snugly around his neck. Grandpa reminded him to put on his hat and mittens too. Koko was soon ready to set forth on his snowy quest. He stood at the open door of the cabin and said goodbye to his family. With loving smiles on their faces, they told him to enjoy the adventure. His father said he'd been on a similar journey when he was Koko's age, and he'd discovered where the jingling bells were coming from, but he didn't want to spoil the surprise for Koko. Grandpa and Grandma stood at the door and waved to Koko as he walked down the steps and towards the path which led into the forest. As Koko walked along, he looked back at his footprints in the snow. There were no other prints, only his, and it made the little koala feel special to be out on such a magical night. Koko continued walking through the deep, soft snow. Snowflakes fell softly upon his head and were as gentle as kisses. The snow beneath his feet sparkled and shimmered as though tiny twinkling stars had been sprinkled amongst the fallen flakes. Very soon, Koko heard the faint sound of tinkling bells. They were coming from the left-hand side of the forest. Leaving the path behind, the little koala followed the joyful noise. It took him near to the home of a rabbit family. As soon as he got closer to the rabbit's burrow, the bells stopped ringing. Koko wondered why they had stopped. Perhaps he should ask the rabbit family if they had heard the bells, and if they knew where they were coming from. As Koko was thinking that, the mother rabbit popped her head out of the burrow and said hello to him. Koko asked if she'd heard the jingling bells. She said she hadn't, but warmly invited Koko into her home. She told him Santa had just delivered some special gifts for her family, and she'd love to share them with Koko. Koko followed her into the burrow and entered the living room, where a crackling fire lit up the faces of the younger rabbits who were cuddled together on the sofa. Over their knees was a blanket that was the colour of the midnight sky. Tiny silver sequins around the edge of the blanket glimmered and glittered in the reflected light of the fire. The mother rabbit insisted Koko stay for a while and told her children to shuffle along the sofa to make room for him. She went into the kitchen to make some hot drinks. Koko took off his outdoor clothes before joining the cosy group on the sofa. The smallest rabbit told Koko the blanket was a gift from Santa, and no matter how many animals were on the sofa, the blanket was somehow big enough for them all. The rabbit whispered, "I think it's a magic blanket." Koko snuggled further beneath the navy-coloured covering. It felt as soft as a cloud and as warm as his grandma's hugs. Mother Rabbit walked towards the group carrying a tray. She said to Koko, "As well as that lovely blanket, Santa left us a huge tin of hot chocolate, and I've used it to make drinks for us. Koko, I hope you like hot chocolate." She passed a mug to the koala. The chocolatey drink was topped with whipped cream, and pink snowflake-shaped marshmallows nestled on top of the cream. Koko thanked the mother rabbit and said he loved hot chocolate, especially when it was snowing. He wrapped his paws around the cup and took a small sip. The creamy hot chocolate was the perfect temperature, so he took a bigger drink. The velvety liquid flowed through his body, making him feel all warm and happy inside. From the contented smiles on the rabbits' faces, he could tell they felt just as peaceful and happy as he did. Koko could have stayed snuggled under the soft blanket, drinking delicious hot chocolate all night, but something caught his attention. Over the gentle crackle of the fire and the soft chatter of the rabbits, he heard the distant sound of the bells again. They sounded merry and joyful, and it felt like they were calling him closer. Koko knew he had to find out where the sound was coming from. He finished the last of his hot chocolate and took his empty cup into the kitchen. He thanked the family for their kindness and wished them a Merry Christmas. He wrapped up warmly and left the burrow giving the rabbits a final wave and another thank you. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the air was wonderfully chilly and crisp. Koko felt cosy and snug in his comfy coat. He pushed his mitten-clad paws deeper into his pockets. A robin alighted on a branch at his side and started singing a soft serenade. The tinkling tones of the bells could be heard more clearly now, and Koko followed the melody as he walked over the freshly fallen snow, leaving his prints behind. The chiming bells led him to a clearing in the forest where a group of dormice were gathered. They were looking into the trees ahead of them and seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Koko stood at the back of the group and asked what they were doing. "We're waiting for the magic to begin," one of the dormice replied. "Santa's just been to see us. He said he's left us a gift to help our families find their way through the snow to our homes. He told us to watch the trees and wait for our magical gift to appear." Koko wondered what the gift could be, so he looked at the trees too. The background sound of bells fell silent, and for a few minutes there was nothing but a peaceful hush and a calm silence. There was an air of happy anticipation as everyone waited for something wonderful to happen. Very soon, the magic began. The dormice and Koko watched in wonder as one by one, floating strings of fairy lights glided through the air and festooned themselves between branches and around tree trunks. Soft pinks, greens, blues and purples now lit up the snow-topped trees, making them glow gently. Pastel-hued snowflakes started to drift down from the dark sky, and they alighted on the snowy ground, where they glowed brightly like stars. The pathways to the homes of the waiting dormice were now clear to see, and within seconds the first visitors began to appear. They walked through the brightly lit trees and were greeted with hugs and kisses by their waiting relatives. When the last of the guests had arrived, the dormice held hands and began to sing Christmas carols. Koko joined in. He didn't know all the words, but he did his best. The joy and love on the faces of the singing dormice made Koko's heart feel as light as a feather, and he couldn't stop smiling. Once the singing had finished, the dormice invited Koko into their homes for warm mince pies and a generous slice of chocolate Yule log. Koko was tempted, but then he heard the far-off sound of the bells chiming again, and so politely said no to the kind dormice. They told him he was welcome to stop by the following day, and perhaps he could bring his family too. Koko thanked them for their kind offer. He wished them a Merry Christmas, and then set off on his snowy adventure again. The bells were louder now, and he let the joyful tune guide his footsteps through Sleepy Forest. Koko walked on and met many animals along the way. He stopped to chat with them and discovered Santa had left thoughtful gifts for all of them. A nightingale told Koko that Santa had given her a songbook because he knew how much she loved singing. She opened the book and sang one of the new tunes just for Koko. Her beautiful voice made him feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Koko met an elderly badger who adored the fragrance of summer roses. She showed Koko the rose-scented candles Santa had given her and said now she could enjoy the relaxing smell of her favourite flowers all year long. A group of moles told Koko how delighted they were with the coal and carrots that Santa had given them. They explained how the gifts would be used to decorate the dozens of wonderful snow moles their youngsters had built during that very snowy day. They showed the line of snow moles to Koko, and he agreed they were extremely impressive. The coal eyes and carrot noses glimmered and twinkled and made the snow moles look even more enchanting. Each animal Koko met asked him into their homes to share the food and drink they prepared. Koko thanked them, but with regret he had to say no to their kind offers. He explained how he was on a quest to solve the mystery of the jingling bells, and he didn't want to stop until he found them. The little koala walked on through the snow. He gazed upwards in wonder at the sparkling stars and thought they seemed to be twinkling more brightly than ever before. The chiming bells guided Koko ever onwards. The light of the full moon sent dancing moonbeams across the snow, lighting the way for the little koala. As he walked on, the tinkling bells grew louder and clearer. Their festive melody filled the winter air with joy. Koko knew he was heading in the right direction. Presently, a new noise joined the chimes. It was the distinctive sound of a man's voice, and he appeared to be chatting to someone. His voice was deep and full of joy, and he kept breaking into a cheery chuckle. Koko walked around a snowy bend and discovered who was talking and chuckling. It was Santa. He was sitting on a snow-blanketed log and speaking to his reindeer. He said they were doing a marvellous job that evening, and he was very proud of them. Santa looked over at Koko and gave him a beaming smile. "Ah, hello there, my koala friend. It's Koko, isn't it? What are you doing out on this fine Christmas Eve?" "I was following the sound of jingling bells," Koko explained. He smiled at Santa. It was hard not to, because he had the jolliest face Koko had ever seen. Santa's tummy wobbled as he broke into another merry chuckle. That would be Rudolph. Mrs. Santa made him some new bells for his reins, and I think she may have put too many jingles in them. He's been shaking those bells all night. He can't resist a jingle. The red-nosed reindeer looked at Koko and nodded, as if to say that was correct. He shook his head, and the bells on his reins jangled happily. Santa said to Koko, "You're a long way from home. Would you like a lift back in my sleigh?" Koko's eyes widened in surprise and delight. "Really? I would love to. Thank you so much." Santa helped the young koala into the sleigh and tucked a warm blanket around him. It was as soft and cozy as the one in the rabbit's home. Santa called out to his reindeer, "Dasher, Dancer, Vixen and Prancer, Comet, Cupid, Donner and Blitzen. Rudolph, are you ready? Away we go." The sleigh smoothly ascended into the night sky. Above the white fields, the sleigh soared. It flew over the tops of trees that were covered in sparkling snow. Across frozen ponds and lakes the sleigh went. Koko saw the reflection of the sleigh as it shimmered over the sparkling icy surfaces below them. Koko waved to those animals who were still awake. He called out a "Merry Christmas" to each one. Rudolph's tinkling bells mingled pleasantly with the tones of hooting owls and far-away carols still being sung somewhere. The blanket around Koko felt warmer with every passing second. His eyes grew heavy, and a soothing, drowsy feeling flowed through him. He leaned his head against Santa's shoulder as they continued on their airborne journey. It wasn't long before the familiar sight of Koko's cozy cabin came into view. His family were sitting on the swinging benches of the veranda and watching the night sky. Knitted covers lay over their knees. They didn't look at all surprised to see Koko flying home in Santa's sleigh. The sleigh came to a silent rest outside the cabin. Santa scooped the small koala up and handed him over to the waiting arms of his grandpa. Santa pressed a gift into Koko's hands and said, "Good night, Koko. Merry Christmas." Koko let out a small yawn. "Oh, Merry Christmas, Santa. Thank you for bringing me home." Grandpa took Koko inside and into his bedroom. He put him into bed and asked what Santa had given him. Koko looked at the present. It was a snow globe. Inside the globe was a snow-covered forest, and animals were standing amongst the trees. Koko recognized all of the animals because he'd seen most of them that day. Looking closer at the globe, he saw a small sleigh soaring through the sky, a line of reindeers at the front. A miniature Santa was inside the sleigh, and next to Santa was a tiny koala snuggled beneath a blue blanket. Koko gave the snow globe a gentle shake. The festive sound of jingling bells filled his room with Christmas magic, and inside the globe, snow began to fall. Koko felt his eyes starting to close. He put the snow globe at the side of his bed and made himself more comfortable under the covers. One by one, his family came into the room, kissed him, and wished him a good night. As Koko fell into a deep sleep, he thought he could still hear the sound of bells coming from far, far away. He mumbled sleepily, "Merry Christmas, Santa." Koko and Kira Go Stargazing by Luke Prendergast. Deep in the heart of a faraway forest stood a cozy wooden cabin. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas: Koko, his parents and grandparents, and, of course, his little sister, Kira the panda. Koko and Kira went to Sleepy Forest Elementary School, where they learnt about all kinds of things like mathematics and the history of the forest, and at exactly which time of year the berries that grew on all the different trees would be at their most ripe, plump and delicious. And in the evenings, after the sun had set and the sky above the forest had gone dark as ink, sometimes Koko and Kira liked to lie on their backs on the grassy patch outside the cabin, looking up at the twinkling stars. "What do you think they are?" Kira would ask. "What do you mean?" Koko would reply, frowning a little. "They're stars." "I know they're stars, silly," Kira would reply with a giggle. "But, I mean, what they really are, what stars are." And then they'd look up at the stars contemplatively, mulling over the question, which seemed stranger and stranger once she thought about it. "Maybe they're fireflies that flew up there and got stuck," Koko proposed. "Or the eyes of some huge far-off creature," suggested Kira, "looking down at us and blinking." "Or they could be burning balls of gas billions and billions of miles away," said Koko. But they both clutched their bellies and laughed at that. That was such a ludicrous idea. One evening, when they had finished feasting on a delicious dinner of eucalyptus pie that their mum had made them, Koko and Kira lay outside, staring up at the stars, when Koko was struck by an idea. I know how we can find out about the stars, he said. How? Kira asked. We have to go and ask Cuthbert, of course. Kira's eyes opened wide and she nodded. Cuthbert. Of course that was who they should go and ask. Cuthbert the camel was one of the oldest and wisest creatures who'd ever lived in Sleepy Forest. He had 2 humps on his back, in which, he said, he could store water for many days, and a sandy-coloured coat and a sagging, hairy-bottomed lip that jiggled whenever he was munching on grass, which he often was. He was also, admittedly, a little bit grouchy, but that was understandable since he'd been plodding around the forest for such a long time. His feet must be pretty sore. Cuthbert's great passion was studying the skies. He called it celestial phenomena. But those kinds of long words were often pretty tricky for Koko and Kira to wrap their heads around. What he meant by celestial phenomena was the stars and planets and comets and asteroids and all the other bits and bobs that floated about up there in the great big above. You see, Cuthbert was terribly, terribly clever. His brain was like a huge castle, every room chock full of all sorts of interesting information. Once, Cuthbert had even helped Koko out when the moon had passed in front of the sun and got stuck. He'd explained to Koko that what he was seeing was a solar eclipse, but that something had gone wrong because the moon wasn't supposed to get stuck like that. And then he'd helped Koko unstick it. So Cuthbert wasn't only clever, he was a pretty considerate camel too. What's more, Koko told Kira, was that Cuthbert must have almost finished the brand new observatory he'd been working on for some time. The structure, which he was calling the Sleepy Forest Stargazing Observatory, was being built in a large clearing in the middle of the forest. He was kitting it out with the latest high-tech telescope. And he told me, Koko said, that once it was done, we should go and check it out. What do you think? I think we should definitely go check it out, said Kira. Koko and Kira went back inside the log cabin to tell their mum that they were off to visit Cuthbert the camel. What a wonderful idea, their mother said. Mind if I join too? And so the 3 of them went to put on their jackets, for it was a little chilly out that evening, and before long they had all set off through the twilit Sleepy Forest. All the other creatures were getting ready for bed. They passed birds settling down in their nests high in the branches, a family of hedgehogs plumping up the soft, dry leaves in their hollow at the foot of an oak tree, and they waved goodnight to Bread and Butter, the 2 ducks who lived in the reeds on Sleepy River. The light was fading slowly, and up through the trees Kira could see that the sky was a darkening lilac colour, but she couldn't see any stars. When she voiced this concern, her mum patted her on the head. Don't worry, Kira, she said. The stars will come. And sure enough, as they turned around the trunk of a particularly grand sycamore and towards the clearing where Sleepy Forest Stargazing Observatory loomed up, Kira noticed that the sky was now speckled with an infinite array of sparkling stars. Even though it was brand new, the observatory looked like an old building. It was made of pale stone, with columns at the front and a big dome on top. And at the ornate front doors stood Cuthbert the camel, looking pretty proud of himself. Cuthbert lifted a hoof and waved them welcome. "Hello, Cuthbert," they said one by one, and Koko added that he thought the Sleepy Forest Stargazing Observatory looked pretty cool indeed. "Why, thank you, Koko," said Cuthbert. "It's taken me some time to build it, stone by heavy stone. But here we are. It's done. And I'm very glad that you've come for the grand unveiling with me." He lifted his head and looked seriously up at the sky. "The stars are out in their millions tonight," he said. "It will be quite some show. Are you ready? You'll be the first Sleepy Foresters to try out the new Stargazing Observatory." "Oh, yes," said Koko, and Kira said, "We can't believe how lucky we are to be the first to try it out. Thanks, Cuthbert." Koko, Kira, and their mum followed Cuthbert through the great doors and into the observatory. Inside it was cool, and softly glowing lamps flickered on the walls, sending shadows dancing around the large circular room. The dome rose up over their head, and in the middle of the room was the strangest contraption Koko or Kira had ever seen. "That doesn't look like a telescope," Kira said, furrowing her eyebrows skeptically. "At least," she added, careful to make sure she was being polite, "not like the ones they showed us in the textbooks at school." "Ah," replied Cuthbert agreeably. "No. In fact, it won't look like anything you've seen anywhere, young Kira. No more putting your eye to a lens and squinting to see the stars. No, no. I have been working on this invention for some time, and it is the most newfangled, high-tech piece of machinery anyone in Sleepy Forest will ever have set their eyes upon. No more looking up at the stars through a telescope. This, my stargazing observatory, will bring the stars down to you." Cuthbert beckoned them over. "Come and take a look," he said. Kira followed Koko and her mum, but she still wasn't quite convinced that this machine was high-tech or newfangled, whatever that might mean. It looked, as far as she was concerned, a bit like a ginormous bed. Yes, a bed. A big, black, rather soft-looking pad was spread out across the floor in the middle of the observatory floor, with a bunch of cushions that looked as though they were designed to rest your head on. The weird bit was that above the bed, rising all the way up to the top of the dome, were layers and layers of glass. Glass so thin that from certain angles it disappeared entirely, and you couldn't see it at all. The only high-tech part of the whole strange contraption that Kira could see were a series of buttons and levers bunched together by the side of the black pad. And yet, as she approached the invention, Kira began to notice, or rather, she began to feel, that there was something truly magical about it. There was a zone of energy around it that made a quiet excitement flood through her and flutter in her chest. The sheets of glass, it turned out, weren't just plain glass at all. Each of them, as she looked at them, had their own particular quality, swirling with colours as though pink or milky white or pale blue galaxies were caught on their surfaces. "How does it work?" Koko asked Cuthbert. "Well," said the camel, "let me show you. Everyone, lie down here, looking up towards the sky." Koko, Kira, and their mum did as they were instructed, lying on their backs so that through the sheets of glass they could see the curved dome of the observatory ceiling. Cuthbert took his place too. He asked if they were ready before pressing a button. With a creak, the dome ceiling unfurled, revealing the brilliant sky behind it. "Wow," whispered Kira. The sky above Sleepy Forest was pitch black and full of dazzling stars, like someone had tipped a jar of sprinkles over it. They burned and blinked high above them. The view was spectacular, but it was the same view that Koko and Kira gazed up at when they lay on their backs outside their little log cabin. "Hold on there 1 moment," Cuthbert said. "Are we ready for the magic?" Koko and Kira held their breaths. In their heads, they were both repeating, "Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Yes, we are." "Here we go," Cuthbert murmured, and he pulled a lever. And then something truly miraculous happened. To Koko and Kira, it no longer felt as though they were lying in the new Stargazing Observatory in Sleepy Forest. Instead, it felt as though they had floated up, up, up into the night sky, and were now soaring through space itself. Asteroids and meteors and comets flew past them. The blazing stars zoomed towards them. Closer and closer they came, spilling their bright light all around. And then, all of a sudden, they were there. The stars were floating all around them. "Crikey," whispered Koko. "We wondered whether the stars were fireflies stuck up on the ceiling of the sky, and we wondered if they were balls of burning gases millions of miles away. But we never imagined this." "No," Kira agreed. "Never." "Well, well, well," said Cuthbert. "These, kids, are the constellations." For all around them swirled creatures whose bodies were made out of stars. Koko saw a ram with curled horns go charging through the observatory, followed by a shoal of shimmering fish. A swan made out of starlight spread its silvery wings, and a crab clicked its claws together as it scuttled across the stone floor. "It really does bring the stars down to you," whispered Kira, looking around in awe. "Why, of course," said Cuthbert gruffly, "just as I said it would. And," he added, "what's more, you can interact with them too. Go ahead, give it a go." Kira had spotted a brilliant star-studded horse pawing the ground in the corner of the observatory. Carefully, she got up from the floor and took a few steps over to it. Her feet felt very light indeed, and with each step she floated a few feet across the room, as though she were no longer on solid earth, but walking on the moon. The horse was no normal horse, but had a pair of bright white wings sprouting out of its back. It ruffled its feathers as Kira approached. "Hello," she said. "I'm Kira, the panda bear, and who, may I ask, are you?" The winged horse gave her a toothy smile. "I am Pegasus," he replied, "guardian of the skies. I fly around at night, flashing my stars, making sure all the world is safe." Kira asked Pegasus if she could touch him, because she had never touched a starry constellation before. "I can do even better than that," Pegasus replied. "Hop on. I can take you for a ride." Kira looked around at her mum, who gave her an encouraging nod, and so, holding on firmly to Pegasus's neck, she swung herself up onto his back. Pegasus's body was warm and silky. It was the strangest feeling in the world, sitting right on top of starlight. Looking down, she could almost see the floor of the observatory through his body, but she felt safe enough. "Ready?" Pegasus asked. "Ready," Kira told him. Pegasus spread his huge wings, gave them a flap, and up they soared into the sky. They flew out of the open dome of the observatory and up into the dense night hanging above Sleepy Forest. Kira gripped on tight and looked down below her at the trees waving their branches in the gentle breeze, as though they were waving hello to her. The forest stretched out for ever and ever. She had never seen her home from the sky before, and marveled at how big and beautiful it was. Pegasus flew her high up into the sky and did a few somersaults in the air. As they sailed back down towards the observatory, Kira wondered whether any of the other creatures who lived in Sleepy Forest was looking up from their beds just then and wondering if they were seeing a falling star. "Thank you, Pegasus," Kira said once she jumped off his back. The star horse gave her a low bow, and Kira gave him a big hug of gratitude. Meanwhile, on the other side of the stargazing observatory, Koko had made his own starry friend. While Kira had been flying through the night sky with Pegasus, a shimmering star-spangled eagle had landed in the observatory, and in its arms it carried a strange-looking stringed instrument, like a miniature harp. "That's Lyra," Cuthbert the camel explained to him. "The musical eagle. They say she strums her tunes for the whole universe to enjoy up there. Go ahead and say hello to her." So Koko went up to the eagle and introduced himself. "Hi there, Koko," the eagle said. "My name's Lyra." Koko told Lyra that he liked the look of her musical instrument very much. He had his own ukulele at home, he told her, which he liked to take to Sleepy Forest Elementary School to play with his classmates. One day he'd like to be in his very own music band. "What kind of instrument is that exactly?" he asked her. "This," said the eagle, presenting the instrument with a flourish of her wing, "is called a lyre. That's how I got my name, Lyra. Get it?" Koko asked Lyra if she'd show him how to play the lyre. "Of course I can," she replied. Then she began to pluck the strings with a delicate claw and strum them with a sweeping wing. The most beautiful sound of music filled the whole observatory. It sounded to Koko like magical tinkling rain. "Here," Lyra said when she'd finished her tune. "You have a go now." "Really?" Koko asked her. "Really." With a trembling hand, Koko reached out for the lyre which the eagle held out to him. The lyre seemed to be made of pure starlight, and Koko was sure his paw would pass right through it. But it didn't. His fingers closed around the cool handle of the lyre. "Go on," Lyra the eagle encouraged him, "just like I did it." So Koko took his paw and strummed the lyre's strings once. That same melodious song swam from the vibrating strings. Now he plucked them with his claws or strummed them with his paws, and the whole observatory was filled once again with that beautiful music. "Wow," Koko said. "I've played real guitar. I've played air guitar. But I've never, ever played star guitar before." While Koko played, Kira and his mum had a little boogie around the observatory. Even Cuthbert joined in with his own shimmying dance. When he'd finished playing, Koko handed the lyre back to the eagle. "Thanks for letting me play," he said. Lyra nodded her head. "And you let me know if you ever need an extra member for that band of yours." And spreading her glittering eagle wings, she took off to the skies. The four of them lay back down on the soft black pad and looked up through the layers of misty glass. The stars were still swirling about the sky, falling down towards them. "Ah," said Cuthbert, "here come a couple of my favourites, Mama Bear and her baby cub." Just as he'd described, after a few moments a great white bear, her thick coat shimmering with stardust, was prowling around the observatory. Around her feet played her little cub, with 2 dark stars for eyes. He jumped this way and that, bouncing onto his mother's big paws and then jumping off. At last, though, the little bear cub gave a big yawn and curled up in the corner of the observatory. His mother noticed that he'd got tired, and she gave a big yawn too. Then she went and lay beside her little star cub, so that he could nuzzle close to her warm body and fall asleep. "Oh, listen," Koko and Kira's mum whispered to Cuthbert. "The baby bear is snoring gently. It seems that even the stars have bedtimes, and it looks like it's long past that little cub's." "And it looks like it's past Koko and Kira's bedtimes too," replied Cuthbert, nodding his head towards the little koala and the little panda bear. Koko and Kira's mum turned around and was surprised to see that her 2 children were now fast asleep, curled up in Cuthbert's stargazing observatory. Their chests were rising and falling gently, the fur on their chins rippling where their sleepy breath was coming raggedly out of their noses. In his sleep, Koko rolled over and slipped a little paw into Kira's so that he could hold it. Their mother's heart was filled up by a swell of love and pride for her children. "I should get them home to bed," she whispered to Cuthbert. "But do you mind if we stay in the observatory a little longer? I enjoy watching the stars. It makes me feel very much at peace." Cuthbert, of course, said she was more than welcome to stay as long as she liked. So the two of them lay staring up at the stars, which swirled and swayed up above them. They saw Pegasus gliding through the atmosphere. They heard the sound of the eagle's lyre echoing through the heavens. They stared up into the great expanse of sky, while around them 4 bears slept soundly. Koko the koala, Kira the panda, and the starry mama bear and her baby cub. They stayed watching the stars until Koko's mother herself began to yawn. She said her goodnights to Cuthbert and lifted her children into her arms. Then she carried them back through the quiet forest, led back to her log cabin by the light of the stars. In tonight's story, we're joining Koko as he's settling down for bedtime in his cozy sleep cabin with his sister, Kira. All is quiet until, quite out of the ordinary, he hears a distant noise coming from Sleepy Forest, and he heads out to investigate. What he finds is the thing of dreams and fantasy. This is Koko and the Goodnight Circus, the coziest bedtime story for kids. Koko snuggled down further into his blankets and pulled his fluffy toy dinosaur tighter into his arms. He opened one eye and peeked over to where Kira was laid in her bed across the room. The golden glow from the nightlight showed that she was already sleeping, and sure enough, Koko soon began to hear her quiet, snuffly snores. Watching her made Koko begin to yawn. Gradually, his heavy eyes began to close. Just as they did, Koko heard a noise. An unusual, far-away noise, unlike anything he'd heard before. It was distant and muffled, coming from somewhere within the forest. Koko glanced at Kira, but she was snoring even louder now, and looked so very cozy he couldn't possibly bring himself to wake her. Instead, he put on his soft flannel dressing gown, tied the belt in a bow, and shuffled on his slippers before tiptoeing through the cabin and out into the moonlit forest. The sounds were faint, but with every step he took into the moonlit forest, they got a little louder, and Koko knew he was headed in the right direction. As always, little golden fairy lights were strung between the trees, and lanterns shone here and there, lighting his path. As the sounds grew louder, Koko began to skip, then hop, then run along the forest path until he emerged at a clearing filled by the biggest tent he'd ever seen. The tent wasn't red and white striped like a normal big top. Instead, it was made of navy blue shiny silk, embellished with golden suns and silver moons and stars. A huge sign made from twirling letters of twisted metal encrusted with silver gemstones read, "The Night Circus." At the front of the tent, a piece of the canopy was pinned back to reveal a golden curtain that swayed invitingly in the wind. And next to the opening was a ticket booth manned by a giraffe in a waistcoat. A beautiful, dreamy song filled the air. A badger with glitter sprinkled all over his fur was walking on stilts with a gold top hat, and a bunch of baby raccoons were dodging in and out of his long legs, all of them giggling. A zebra in a silver dress was blowing bubbles bigger than Koko had ever seen and letting them float up into the night sky. She blew bubbles of all shapes, somehow even making one bubble float within another. Koko watched for a while, seeing how their shimmering surfaces turned between silver, pink, and green under the circus lights. A frog in a bronze all-in-one was standing stock still, face painted bronze too, so that he looked like a statue. Koko walked up the deep blue carpet that had been rolled out across the forest floor and up to the ticket desk. The giraffe beamed down at him and handed him a silver ticket that shone like the inside of a chocolate wrapper. Koko checked his dressing gown pockets to see if he had any coins in there, but his paws came out empty. The giraffe grinned. "The price of admission is 1 wish," he said. "It helps fill the air with magic. Just make your wish and you can go inside. Who knows? It might even come true." Koko screwed his eyes shut and made his wish, wishing that Kira would win the upcoming spelling bee she'd been talking about all day. When he opened his eyes again, the curtain was being held open, and he was being ushered to step on through to the night circus. Koko rubbed his eyes with his bald paws, not believing what he saw. No matter how much he rubbed his eyes, the sight stayed the same. The night circus simply was this beautiful. Dancing colours and lights and shapes drew Koko deeper into the circus tent, and he slumped into one of the comfy deck chairs circling the edge of the circular stage floor, craning his neck back to look at the ceiling. There, monkeys were doing a trapeze act, swinging one another through the sky on rope swings, flipping and making graceful movements with their arms and tails that made you think they were flying. Their fur was decorated with little gems that twinkled in the spotlights. Down on the floor in front of him, a great grey elephant was standing, all 4 giant feet on a silver ball, spreading his large ears for balance. Rainbow-coloured powder paints covered his sides, and he wore a soft blue velvet hat on his head. Not far to his side, a lion was doing gymnastics, cartwheeling and twirling ribbons, and dancing across the circle to the dreamy songs. A zebra was blowing up midnight blue balloons, twisting them into the shapes of different animals and letting them float over to members of the crowd. A bear teetered this way and that on a unicycle, with a big, round silver nose pinned over his little brown one. A hippo hula hooped, throwing the hoops in the air and catching them, and then juggling silver balls while she kept jiggling her hips and keeping the hoops spinning. All of the show was soundtracked by the most beautiful music, played by a band of flamingos in the corner. Mice circled between the flamingos' feet, spinning little pirouettes, tiny little soft-furred ballerinas, twirling in time. The whole display was enchanting, and Koko found it hard to take his eyes away, so he didn't. Instead, he stayed in his seat and watched and watched and watched until he eventually grew tired and began to yawn. He'd been slowly lulled by the gentle twinkling colours and magical sounds towards sleep. Koko began to see some of the performers yawn too, in between their acts. That wouldn't do. They were all sleepy. The little koala thought it was time everyone settled down and had a rest in the long hours before the sun came up. So Koko got up, stretched, and went to talk to the closest performer, the elephant. "Good evening, sir," Koko said. The elephant smiled and said good evening in return. "Aren't you getting tired now?" Koko asked. The elephant rumpled his eyebrows as if thinking, and then said, "Actually, I think I am." He thought some more. "Actually, I definitely am." The elephant closed his eyes and yawned the biggest yawn Koko had ever seen. Koko smiled. "I thought you might be," he said. "You've done a really good job of entertaining everyone all night. But now, I think you need a good night's sleep." The elephant grinned and looked around him. "I think we all need a good night's sleep," he said, pointing at a zebra who was covering her mouth with her hoof as she yawned. "How about this?" he said. "I'll go and get the blankets, and you tell everybody it's bedtime." Koko smiled sleepily. He thought that was a wonderful idea. "Okay, I'm on it," he said. "Good night, elephant." The elephant wished him good night and went to find the blankets. Koko headed over to the lion. "Hey, Mr. Lion," he said. "I like your mane and your big paws. I think your gymnastics are wonderful. But it's late now. Aren't you tired of being topsy-turvy? I think it might be bedtime." The lion purred at the praise and said thank you to Koko before agreeing. He didn't want to do any more cartwheels tonight. It was time for bed. "You go brush your teeth and comb your mane," Koko said. "I'll tell the others. Good night, lion." The lion grinned a sleepy grin, wished Koko good night, and headed off towards the back of the tent. Next, Koko went to the hippo, giving her plenty of space so he didn't get hit by a hula hoop. "Hello, Miss Hippo," Koko said. "You've been wiggling those hula hoops for so long now. You're super talented," he chuckled. "It's extra cool when you throw the hoops in the air and catch them. But you must be sleepy, right? I think it's time for bed now." Miss Hippo let her hula hoop twist round once, twice, 3 times more, before letting it drop to the ground and raising her arms in a ginormous stretch. "Thank you, little koala," she said. "Now you've said it." "Oh," she yawns again. "It does feel like bedtime." Koko smiled and said she should go and wash off her face paint and put on her jammies. The hippo happily did just that. "Good night, Hippo," Koko said. Next, Koko called to the zebras. "Hey, zebras," he said. "You've done amazing tonight. You make the guests feel so welcome. You're all wonderful at your jobs, but I think your job is done now. Shall we go to sleep?" The zebras let their last balloons float up, up, up to rest on the roof of the tent, and the closest one to Koko smiled. "I think you're right, Koko," she said. "Everyone's gone home to bed. It's time for us to settle down too." One by one, they trotted backstage to put their pink striped pajamas on, plait their tails, and brush their teeth. "Good night, zebras," said Koko. Then Koko went to talk to the bear. "Hey, little dude," the bear said. "Hey, Mr. Bear," Koko replied. "Are your legs tired?" The bear stepped off his unicycle and gave his legs a wiggle. "They are," he said. "Sometimes I'm having so much fun I don't even notice." Koko grinned. "That's cool," he said. "But you won't be able to cycle tomorrow if you don't rest." Mr. Bear said that he was right and gave Koko a sleepy high five before heading through to have a shower and put on his own cozy slippers. "Good night, Bear," Koko said. As the bear headed backstage, he tucked his unicycle beneath its little cover and whispered, "Good night, unicycle," quiet enough so that no one could hear it. Koko did though, and giggled at the sweet bear. The song that had been floating through the air drifted off, and Koko clapped politely. He headed over to where the flamingo band was and told them that maybe it was time to switch to lullabies and stop playing for the night. He said the flamingos must need their rest. They had been standing on one leg all day after all. That's exhausting. The flamingos agreed and put down their instruments, ruffling the fur on Koko's head as they went by. True to Koko's suggestion, they were humming lullabies as they brushed their feathers and washed their beaks. As the music calmed, the little tiny mouse ballerinas slowed their twirling, relaxing to the flats of their feet. They took off their ballet shoes and tutus and headed backstage to their matchbox-sized dressing rooms, where they changed into their soft cotton polka dot onesies, ready to snuggle down. "Good night, flamingos," Koko said. "Good night, mice." Finally, the monkeys climbed down from the roof, and Koko told them it was time for bed. They ate their midnight banana snacks and went to scrub their teeth and clean their faces, ready to fall asleep. "Good night, monkeys," Koko called. By this time, the elephant had brought a big pile of comfy cushions through to the ring and began laying them out with his trunk, putting down blankets for each animal. The lion had joined him, carrying an armful of stuffed toys, placing one on each pillow. The hippo had turned on the nightlight, which projected stars onto the tent's roof. They slowly floated across the ceiling and then floated back again, white against the dark blue of the canvas. The zebras had laid out pillows on top of each cushion to make cozy beds for each animal. The elephant's was made of a whole pile of cushions and pillows since he was so large. The bear had passed out silky sleeping masks, and the flamingos had pressed play on the lullabies that they always played when it was time to drift off. One by one, each animal climbed into their bed, pulled up their blankets and snuggled their stuffed toys in close. Each had their own special one. Some looked new, like the bear's dragon toy, whose wings still shimmered and rustled a little bit, as it hadn't been hugged enough to go soft yet. Others looked ancient, like the littlest zebra's bunny, whose whole body was floppy, not just its ears. A monkey was clutching a koala toy that looked a little like Koko, tucking it under her chin as she sucked her little thumb and cuddled up. The little mice had little toys no bigger than Koko's little finger, little tiny teddies and felt mice and dolls that could fit in a thimble. Koko took a seat on the only spare comfy cushion and looked out at the cozy sea of circus performers. How sleepy the scene was, with all of these cuddly, sleepy animals. The nightlight was glowing softly. The stars were aglow, and a lullaby gently drifted from the music box in the corner, which had been wound up and would play softly all night. Koko recognized the song. It was a classical one that his grandpa played at bedtime, which had something to do with the moon. Clair de Lune, that was what it was called. Koko straightened the blanket over one of the monkeys, who was laid nearby, tucking him in like a burrito. "Would you like me to tell you a bedtime story?" Koko asked the group. Between yawns and settling sounds, sleepy yeses sounded out through the tent. "Okay," Koko said. He racked his brain for a perfect story. Should it be the one about the dinosaurs in the castle? Or about the dragon who was always dancing? He went through the storybook in his mind, flicking through the pages, until he came up with the perfect one. "It goes like this," Koko said. Out in the jungle, oh far, far away, animals of all kinds are stopping for the day. It's time to stop running or swinging through trees. It's time for your story. So listen up, please. First, there's the elephant, the wisest of all. As large as he is, his friends are quite small. The elephant and the mice are close as can be, because friends can be friends, however unlikely. Then there's the lion, with his lush golden hair. He's king of the jungle, but he's kind and fair. He listens to everyone and always does his best. He knows that a good leader looks after the rest. Next, there's the hippo, who's brave and strong. She lives life following her own heart's song. She knows the best person you can be is you. And you should be who you are, whatever you do. Next come the zebras, the stripy-hooved gang, the friendliest friends in all of the land. They love one another just as they are, because they know together they'll go extra far. The bear is strong as can be, because he stands up for what he believes. He'd stand up for you and he'd stand up for me, because he believes everyone should live happily. The flamingos are creative with the music they play. They believe that whatever they think, they can make. And just like them, you can be creative too. Just open your heart and don't worry, just do. The mice are the softest, so quiet and so sweet, and they could be missed as they twirl past your feet. But although they're quiet, they're loved just as much, because each is as special as the loudest of us. Finally, the monkeys, they make us laugh. They bring joy to the hippo, the lion and giraffe. We love how they're silly and how they play, because isn't it nice to feel joy every day? Each animal's different in so many ways, but each has a way to brighten our day. Every animal's equal and can shine so bright. So shine your light tomorrow. But for now, good night. Koko looked out across the tent. Every animal was snoozing in their puddle of blankets. They all looked peaceful, bellies rising and falling, soft smiles on their faces. Koko smiled too. Good night all, Koko said. No one responded. Everyone was deep asleep. Koko's job here was done. Koko yawned. Maybe he could go to sleep now too. A soft hoot filled the tent, too gentle to wake any of the animals. It seemed not everyone was asleep yet. A white feathered owl swooped down from the rafters and landed next to Koko, hooting softly again in greeting. Good evening, Mrs. Owl, Koko yawned. It's not bedtime for you. What are you doing here? The owl spread a wing around Koko's shoulder and said, I wanted to tell you what a kind koala you are, making everyone cozy like that. And I thought you might be sleepy too. It's your turn for a bedtime story. Koko smiled sleepily. I'd like that, he said. The owl brought Koko a blanket and pulled it over him with her beak. Koko stroked her soft feathers as he snuggled into his cushion and settled into sleep. The owl began reading to Koko in her soft voice. This is how it went. There is a koala as small as can be, whose heart is as warm as a hot cocoa treat. He spreads happiness wherever he goes, from school to his home, to the night circus show. The little koala, so fuzzy, warm and sweet, with dressing gown on and slippers on his feet, cares so well for others and makes them so calm with his kind, kind words and his koala charm. But it's time now the koala stops thinking of others and nestles down deep in his cozy covers. It's time he gets sleepy and begins to count sheep. There he goes now, drifting straight off to sleep. The owl smiled at Koko as his eyes closed, and he drifted gently off. She picked up the little koala in her large wings and put him on her feathery back. She beat her wings as gently as she could and glided into the air towards the distant glow of his little wooden cabin. Koko drifted in and out of sleep to visions of the starry sky as the owl flew him home. The forest stretched out like a green carpet beneath them, and the warm breeze tickled Koko's cheeks. The face on the moon smiled at the little koala and whispered to him, "Good night." So sleepy, his words were barely audible, Koko replied with a "good night" too. Koko's eyes were so heavy he could barely keep them open. As he blinked a few final, slow, sleepy blinks, the moon disappeared and he began to snore. The next time his eyes opened, he was in his bed. The little snores of his panda bear sister filled the room once more. Looking lazily at the room around him, Koko wondered whether the whole thing might just have been a dream. Was the night circus real? Had he really been there? He didn't even notice the soft, silky owl feather clutched tightly in his paw as he tucked it against his cheek, letting his eyes close again and dreams take over. Koko visited the night circus. Yes, indeed, that's true. But the circus was now sleeping, and so are you. Koko Helps Kira Get Back to Sleep by Luke Prendergast. Deep in the heart of a faraway forest stood a cozy wooden cabin. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas. One evening, the whole family sat at the dinner table in their little wooden cabin, eating a delicious meal of eucalyptus stew. Kira, however, was rather fidgety. She simply couldn't keep still. She kept hopping up and down on her seat and wiggling her bum and wiggling her little toes. "What's going on with you this evening, Kira?" their mum asked her gently. "I've never seen you this restless before. Is something wrong?" "Oh, no, Mum," Kira replied. "There's nothing wrong at all. Quite the contrary. In fact, there's something very right." Her mum raised an inquisitive eyebrow, and Kira explained that the next day her year at Sleepy Forest Elementary School were going on a school trip to the other side of the forest, where there was a high ropes course. There were ladders on trees and wooden bridges in the canopies, and zip wires that brought you back down to the forest floor. "It's a panda bear's dream," she squealed, almost tipping off her chair. And it was also the reason she was so restless. She was too full up with excitement to sit still. She simply couldn't wait for tomorrow to come. Koko and Kira's mum laughed a sweet, chuckling laugh. "Well, I'm very excited for you too, Kira. But you're going to have to settle down and eat your food and get a good night's sleep. You're going to need to be well fed and well rested for all that tree climbing tomorrow." As per usual, her mother, who was a very wise koala indeed, was right. Kira did need to make sure she had plenty of energy for her school trip, so she did her best to keep her excitement under control, and she finished off every last mouthful of her eucalyptus stew. She even asked for seconds. When they had finished their dinner, Koko let out a big yawn. And, because yawns can be terribly catching like that, Kira let out a big yawn too. "Wow," said Koko. "You might actually be tired, Kira. Come on, let's go and get ready for bed while you're yawning already. Hopefully you'll be able to sleep the whole night through." Koko and Kira went to their room. They changed into their pajamas. Koko wore a blue pajama shirt and some blue shorts because blue was his favourite colour. And Kira's favourite colour was purple. So she put on a big purple t-shirt and pulled the purple bow out of her hair. They went to the bathroom and brushed their teeth, making sure they brushed for a whole minute on the top and a whole minute on the bottom. They pulled faces at each other in the bathroom mirror to keep themselves occupied. All kinds of monstrous faces, until soon enough the time was up. They spat their toothpaste into the sink and wiped away the bits that had dribbled down onto their chins. When they went back through to the bedroom, their mum had already been in to pull the curtains closed. A soft, silvery moonlight peeked in through the corners of the window, and they could hear the magical whisperings of the forest trees outside. Koko and Kira climbed into their beds. Koko let out another big yawn, and so did Kira. My, said Kira. "I must be tired. Night-night, Koko." "Night-night, Kira," Koko replied. And with that, they turned over and fell asleep. 1 minute passed, and another minute, and another one slipped by. Outside, a breeze stirred through the trees, and Kira, poor Kira, lay wide awake in her bed. She had woken up after only a few minutes of sleep, her stomach once again full of excitement about the following day. She turned over in her bed, first this way, then that way, trying her best to find a comfortable position that would send her straight back into the land of dreams. But try as she might, she could not. Eventually, Kira's twisting and turning roused Koko from his sleep. He turned over and looked at her across the room and said, "Oh dear, Kira, can't you sleep?" Kira let out a sigh. "Oh, I'm afraid I can't, Koko," she said. "I fell asleep for a few minutes there, but then I woke up full of excitement, and now I can't get myself back to sleep." "Well," Koko whispered, "the best thing to help you fall asleep is to concentrate on your breathing. Your breath carries the special magic of sleep on it. So if you pull it gently all the way down into your belly, it helps settle all your excitement and lets you drift off to sleep. Do you want to try it, Kira? Why don't we try some deep breathing together?" Kira said that sounded like a good idea indeed. So Koko told her to take a deep breath all the way down into the warm bottom of her tummy, and then he told her to let the breath out slowly. They breathed in, and they breathed out. You have to feel the breath go all the way down to the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes, Kira, Koko told her. Kira did as Koko said. She took a deep breath in and felt it tingle all the way down to the tips of her fingers and the tips of her toes. Then she let it slowly out. She felt her body relax as though it were carried on a big, fluffy cushion. "Has that helped?" Koko whispered. "I definitely feel more relaxed," Kira told him. "But I haven't been able to fall asleep. What do you think I should do?" "Well, we'll have to try something different," Koko said. "Do you want to know what I do whenever I can't sleep?" "Yes, please," replied Kira. "I count sheep," he said. "Count sheep?" asked Kira. "What does that mean?" "It's a method for falling back asleep," Koko explained. "You close your eyes, and in your head you imagine sheep grazing in a beautiful grassy field. In the middle of the field is a fence, a low white fence. And one by one, the sheep run along and hop over the fence, one after another, an endless stream of sheep, and you count them as you go. The theory is that counting sheep is so monotonous that you'll fall back asleep again without even knowing it. Would you like to give it a try?" Kira said that it was certainly worth a go. "Close your eyes then," said Koko, "and do what I just said. Count the sheep." Kira closed her eyes, and just like her big brother had told her to, she pictured a beautiful green meadow with lots of sheep grazing on it. The sheep were so big and fluffy that they looked like big puffs of cloud sitting on the grass, munching away. Then she pictured a white fence in the field, and then one by one, she nudged the sheep in her imagination to start jumping the fence. First one, then two, then 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. She counted 20 sheep, and then 30 sheep. She counted 50 sheep, and then 100 sheep. By the time she got to 217 sheep, Kira decided that as fun as it was, this counting sheep method was not successfully sending her off to sleep. "Koko," she whispered. I counted 217 sheep. The field is pretty busy with sheep now, but I still can't fall asleep. Okay, Koko replied. Let's try something else then. He slipped out of his bed and turned on their nightlight, which was in the shape of a little pig. Then he perched on the side of Kira's bed. Do you think a cup of hot chocolate might help you fall back to sleep? He asked. Kira nodded. I think it might. Okay then, said Koko. I'll go and make you one now. I won't be long. Thank you, Koko, Kira said. Koko went out of their bedroom and climbed the ladder down into the lower section of their cozy little log cabin. Everyone else had gone to bed now, and the kitchen was only lit up by watery moonlight coming in through the windows. He poured some milk into a saucepan and very carefully placed the saucepan in the hot oven so that the milk could warm. When it was ready, he put on oven mitts and took the saucepan out. He poured the warm milk out into Kira's favourite mug, a purple one, of course. And then he added a few scoops of the most delicious hot chocolate powder ever, which came from Papa Praline's chocolate factory, just on the other side of Sleepy Forest. He stirred the chocolate powder into the warm milk until all the clumpy bits had dissolved and the milk had turned a lovely, thick brown colour. Koko took a deep breath in through his nose. That smelled delicious, if he did say so himself. Careful not to let any of the drink slosh and spill over the sides, Koko picked up the mug of hot chocolate and climbed back up the ladder. He went back into his bedroom and perched on the edge of Kira's bed again. Here you go, Kira, he whispered softly. Here's your hot chocolate. Kira sat up in her bed and took the purple mug from her brother. She gave the hot chocolate a sip. That's delicious, Koko, she said. Thank you very much. It's so warm and soothing in my tummy. I'm sure this will help send me back off to sleep. She took another sip of the hot chocolate. Then she said, Hey, Koko, do you think you could sing a nighttime lullaby on your ukulele? I think that would help me to get to sleep too. Of course I can, Koko said, because there was very little he loved doing so much as playing his ukulele. He picked it up from the side and gave it a little strum, just to check that it was in tune. He cast about the room, searching for inspiration on what lullaby to sing for Kira. His eyes drifted over their beds, across the walls, and out of the window, where he saw that the sky was now spangled with lots of little stars. That gave him just the idea. Koko strummed his ukulele and began to sing one of his favourite lullabies ever. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. As Koko ended his lullaby, he looked at his sister and saw that her eyes were closed. Her duvet was rising and falling steadily from her breath, and a look of peaceful contentment had settled over her face. It seemed that she had fallen into a deep slumber. So Koko carried on strumming his ukulele gently, letting the spangly chords echo around their little cabin room like waves lapping on the shore, bearing Kira ever deeper into sleep. When he was sure that his sister had drifted completely off, Koko stopped his strumming. He rested his ukulele on his knee. He looked at Kira fondly. Kira opened one eye. "Oh dear, Kira," Koko sighed. "You're still not asleep?" Kira shook her head. "I loved your ukulele playing," she told him. "It was so peaceful. It made me feel all warm inside, and I felt like I was drifting away, up into the sky. And for a while, I thought I was floating up there with all the twinkly stars. But, well, I still can't sleep. I'm still too excited." Koko put his ukulele back down on the side and stroked his chin thoughtfully. He murmured. "We'll have to think of something even better then." Koko scratched his head for more ideas of what could help send his little sister off to sleep. He let his eyes ramble across the room, lit up as it was with the pink glow of the pig nightlight. His eyes drifted over the wall, over the sprigs of bamboo that grew in the corner of the cabin, and at last alighted upon the bookshelf. Koko had an idea. "Hey, Kira," he said, "how about I read you a bedtime story? Hopefully that will take your mind off your excitement and transport you to a whole other magical world. Then, hopefully, you'll be able to fall asleep." From beneath her duvet, Kira smiled and nodded. "That sounds like an excellent idea, Koko," she said. "Could you read me a story, pretty please?" So Koko got up from the edge of Kira's bed and walked over to the bookshelf. Their dad had built the shelf and fixed it upon the wall years ago, and it contained many wonderful volumes of books. There were adventure books and mystery books. There were fantasy books and books for a rainy day. But there was one particular volume that Koko knew he needed. Right at the end of the shelf stood a big, dusty book, bound in leather, with its well-used ancient pages yellowed and crisp. On the spine, in gold lettering, were written the words, "Bedtime Stories." Koko pulled the book off the shelf and carried it back across the room. He sat on the edge of Kira's bed once more and lay the book on his lap. It felt heavy. He flipped the book over and it fell open on a story. "Oh, Kira," Koko whispered, "this one looks like the perfect story. It isn't one we've heard before. It's called The Sleepy Star." "The Sleepy Star," Kira repeated. "That does sound like a good story." She nestled down further into her duvet and nuzzled her head into the softness of her pillow. "Let's read that one." And so Koko began to read the words of the story, The Sleepy Star. It went like this. Once upon a time there was a star who, whenever nighttime fell, got very sleepy indeed. Now, this doesn't sound like such a bad thing to us creatures who live on the earth, who fall asleep when darkness sets in. But it was something of a problem for the star. That's because since the beginning of history, it's the star's job to be awake at night and twinkling. And then, when daylight comes, that's when the stars get to close their eyes and rest. But this little star, she got tired at night. And so, when all the other stars were out twinkling and shining, she'd yawn and drift off, and her eyes would close, and then her light would go out. When this happened, the other stars would wake her up. "Come on," they would say. "You have to stay awake. It's night time, and we need your twinkling." And then the little star would peel open her eyes and concentrate on being awake. And that would work for a little while. But sooner or later, and it was always sooner, she would drift off back to sleep, and her light would go out. The other stars did everything they could to try to solve the problem. They took turns at prodding the little star to try to keep her awake. But that just resulted in the little star becoming tired and grouchy. No one likes to be prodded like that. They even tried telling her stories all night to keep her entertained. But the stories didn't work. The sleepy little star would just fall asleep right in the middle of them. Finally, they investigated whether she was getting enough sleep during the daytime so that she had enough energy to twinkle at night. And what they discovered was that she was often awake during the daytime when she ought to be asleep. They scratched their starry heads about this. What a topsy-turvy little star that sleepy star was. They just could not think of what to do about it. One night, while they were trying to keep the sleepy star awake, the silver moon sailed past them. The moon was renowned far and wide for being one of the wisest beings to voyage across the skies. And so, the stars told the moon about the sleepy little star's predicament. They explained that she slept at night and stayed awake in the day, which was entirely the wrong way around for a star. Could the wise moon think of any solution for their dilemma? The moon stroked his silvery chin while he contemplated the problem. It was a tricky one indeed. But the stories of the moon's wisdom were not unfounded, and soon enough he came up with a solution. "This sleepy star," he said, "clearly doesn't like to twinkle at night and sleep during the day. So instead of changing him, why don't we all just accept him for who he is? He's a day twinkler, not a night twinkler. So perhaps you should let him do just that." All the stars scratched their heads once again. They'd never considered just letting the sleepy star be the way the sleepy star was. That was a rather inspired idea from the moon, they agreed. Smiles began to spread across the faces of all the stars, including the sleepy star herself, who rather liked the idea of being allowed to twinkle at the time she preferred to twinkle. "That's a wonderful solution," the stars told the moon. "But there is just one problem." "And what might that problem be?" the moon asked the stars. "Well," piped up one star, "stars twinkle at night. That's what the very name star means. So if this sleepy star here isn't twinkling at night, should we still call her a star?" The moon agreed that this was a very good point indeed. "Perhaps, in that case," he suggested, "they ought to give the sleepy star a new name." "Good idea," the stars agreed, but then they frowned. "What name should we give her then?" The moon smiled at them. "Best to ask her, don't you think?" he said. And so all the other stars turned to the sleepy star, and they asked her what she would like her new name to be. The sleepy star thought about this question for a little while. Then she came up with an answer. "I think I would like to be called the sun." The stars all nodded in agreement. Sun. That was a perfect name. And so ever since then, the sun has not shone at night, but has kept the daytime sky lit bright with all of her brilliant twinkling. When Koko had finished telling the story, he closed the book. "Wasn't that a good story, Kira?" he whispered. "Kira? Kira?" Koko peered at his little sister. Kira, it seemed, had fallen asleep. What a miracle! Telling the bedtime story had worked its magic then. Koko watched her for a few moments, watched the rise and fall of her breathing, and the twitching of her little panda nose as she drifted off into her dream world. She was probably dreaming of swinging from trees, zooming down zip lines through the sleepy forest canopy. He waited a minute or two to see if she would wake up again, but she didn't. And so, very quietly indeed, so as not to disturb her, Koko slipped off the edge of her bed. He returned the book of bedtime stories to the shelf where it belonged and slid under his own bed covers. It was warm in there, so soft and cozy, just perfect for falling asleep. Koko let out a big yawn. He was very tired indeed now. All that work trying to help Kira fall asleep had really taken it out of him. He leant over and turned off the pig nightlight, and the room sank into darkness. Now there was just the silvery light of the moon slipping through the gaps in the curtains. Now there was just the tranquil noise of the crickets outside and the wind whispering through the trees and the steady grumbles of the trees. The world was entirely at peace. Koko closed his eyes. He pictured a green meadow in the evening, full of fluffy clouds of sheep. In the middle of the field there was a little fence, But before Koko could even count a single sheep jumping over it, he had fallen into a deep and profoundly peaceful sleep.